The official records call it the Southampton Incident, a vague title meant to obscure the truth. But on August 23, 1831, across a 16-mile stretch of Southampton County, Virginia, 55 people were found dead, men, women, and children erased in their own homes. The military's brutal response killed more than twice that number, most of them innocent. This was not a simple incident. It was an act of calculated desperation that forced America to face a question it had been avoiding. What happens when people who have nothing left to lose decide they'd rather die free than live in chains? Before we continue with the story of Nat Turner and the rebellion that shook the South to its core, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this from Virginia, North Carolina, or anywhere in the American South, leave a comment telling me what state you're from. This story belongs to your history. Hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear is a piece of American history that powerful people spent generations trying to bury. And make sure you've got time, because this story doesn't end the way anyone expected it to. Nat Turner was born on October 2, 1800, into a Virginia defined by contradiction, the state of liberty that held nearly 500,000 people in bondage. In Southampton, the threat of being sold south to the cotton plantations hung over every enslaved person, tearing families apart. Nat's African-born mother, Nancy, instilled in him a deep hatred of bondage, and his father's successful escape proved that freedom was possible. From childhood, Nat was different. He learned to read, devoured the Bible, and was known for his preaching gift. More profoundly, he had visions, which earned him the name, the Prophet. At age 21, after running away, Nat did the unthinkable. He returned voluntarily, claiming the Spirit instructed him to serve his earthly master while directing his desires toward heaven. This act bewildered his peers, but his visions grew urgent. On May 12, 1828, the Spirit spoke clearly. The time was fast approaching when the first should be last and the last should be first. Nat began to see his purpose not as personal escape, but as liberation. By 1830, Nat was enslaved by Joseph Travis. His wife Cherry and their 2 children had been sold to a nearby farmer, Giles Rhee. The final breaking point may have come in February 1831, when Rhee's son used Nat's own child as collateral for a debt, turning Nat's blood into a bargaining chip in a white man's financial troubles. Nat, working in the fields and workshops, watched for the sign he believed God would send to begin his work. The sign Nat Turner had been waiting for arrived on February 12, 1831, an annular solar eclipse. To him, the ring of fire surrounding the sun's black center looked like a black hand reaching across the face of the sun, a divine confirmation that the time had come. Nat spent the next 6 months in deliberate preparation, speaking only to 4 absolutely trusted men: Hark, known for strength; Henry, a man from another farm; Nelson, steady nerve; and Sam. They initially planned to strike on July 4th, but Nat fell ill. They waited, refining their plan. On August 13th, another sign appeared. The sun turned a bluish-green color, which Nat accepted as divine confirmation. The hour had come. On the oppressively hot Sunday afternoon of August 21st, 1831, the conspirators gathered near Cabin Pond. They roasted a pig, and 2 new men joined them: Park's brother-in-law Jack, and Will, a man known for his barely contained rage. The plan was simple: move from house to house, killing slaveholding families in their sleep, gathering weapons and recruits, and ultimately seizing the armory in Jerusalem. Their retreat, if necessary, would be the Great Dismal Swamp. At approximately 2 in the morning on August 22nd, they approached the Travis farmhouse. Nat climbed a ladder, let the others in, and stood over Joseph Travis with a hatchet. But Nat's hand trembled, and the blow failed to kill. Will pushed past him, swinging his axe with lethal no hesitation. They killed Joseph, his wife Sally, and the entire family, ensuring no witnesses who could raise the alarm before dawn. They took Travis's guns, horses, and his sword, which Nat would carry. In the yard, as dawn approached, Nat used the sword to drill his now 8 men in surreal military formations. They moved to Salathill Francis's place, killing him in bed. At Piety Rhee's farm, Nat faced a profound personal choice: his own wife, Cherry, and his children were enslaved there. He passed by without stopping, knowing this was not a rescue mission, but a war. They killed Piety Ree and her son and wounded the overseer. By mid-morning, their numbers had grown, with some enslaved men joining immediately, and others refusing out of fear or paralyzing uncertainty. The rebels didn't force anyone. After killing the residents at Elizabeth Turner's farm, the group split. Hark took 6 men on foot, while Nat led 9 mounted men toward Catherine Whitehead's place, the rebellion now fully in motion. The Whitehead farm was the site of the largest casualty count. Nat Turner personally took the life of the widow Catherine Whitehead and pursued her daughter Margaret, killing her with a fence rail and his sword near a fence. This was the only person Nat himself killed during the rebellion, a detail he later confessed, leaving open the question of whether his divine drive extended to the physical act of execution. By noon on Monday, August 22nd, the rebels had killed approximately 45 people and grown to about 60 men, armed with axes, guns, and farm implements. They were moving toward Jerusalem when the alarm caught up with them. White families fled, and armed men gathered, instantly eliminating the element of surprise. The next few hours would decide whether this was a revolution or a massacre. The afternoon saw the rebellion unravel. Near James Parker's farm, the rebels encountered their first organized resistance. Despite outnumbering the defenders, the rebels, most inexperienced in combat, were driven back. They retreated in disorder. Their push toward Jerusalem stopped. White forces, including local militia and volunteers from North Carolina, converged rapidly. By evening at Thomas Ridley's plantation, Nat had only 40 exhausted and hungry men remaining, many of whom slipped away overnight. The final attempt came at sunrise on August 23rd, at Samuel Blunt's plantation, where a small fortified group of white men opened fire. The rebels scattered in chaos, and Nat Turner became separated from the others. The rebellion was effectively over, dissolved less than 48 hours after it began. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Nearly 3,000 armed men converged on Southampton County, and what followed was a campaign of indiscriminate retribution. Armed white mobs, fueled by fear and rage, killed black people, enslaved and free, throughout the county, often executing them on the spot without evidence. A Richmond editor wrote that the white retribution was hardly inferior in barbarity to the rebels' atrocities. An estimated 120 black people, most of them innocent, were killed in the following days. Captured rebels were swiftly tried in special courts, and 30 were executed. However, Nat Turner himself was nowhere to be found. For 10 weeks, while thousands of armed men occupied the county, Nat hid in plain sight, moving between simple hiding places within a few miles of where the rebellion had started. The woods constantly echoed with gunfire, creating a perpetual state of danger for any black person found away from their assigned place. Turner's survival relied on ingenuity, beginning with a hiding spot found beneath the massive uprooted root system of a fallen pine tree. Nat Turner's first hiding place was an ingenious, enlarged cave beneath a massive fallen pine tree, concealed by fence rails and debris. He lay in this space, barely large enough to lie down, stiflingly hot and soup-thick with humidity, for 6 long weeks. He was sustained by enslaved people from nearby farms, whose names are lost to history, but who risked everything to leave him food caches of cornbread and sweet potatoes. The psychological toll was immense. He lay in darkness, hearing the search parties and the occasional gunshot, knowing that innocent people were being executed in retaliation and that his wife had been tortured for information. During this time, the white population of Southampton County lived in a state of sustained terror bordering on mass hysteria. Rumors of Turner's escape or new uprisings spread wildly, disrupting daily life. The military occupation was extraordinary, with 3,000 armed men interrogating and torturing black residents indiscriminately. Governor John Floyd, deeply shaken, suggested that Northern abolitionists must be involved and began drafting new restrictive laws. The fear spread throughout the South, ending the brief period when slavery's sustainability had been questioned and leading to a brutal increase in slave patrols. After 6 weeks, his supplies ran out, and Turner left his hole. For the next 2 weeks, he became nocturnal, moving through forests and swamps like a ghost, narrowly avoiding discovery. He learned that the immediate crisis had passed, but also overheard white men talking about the reprisals. joking about the executions as if they were hunting deer. Turner never tried to escape north, despite his intelligence and ability. Historians debate whether he waited for a second chance or felt a deep responsibility to the men who had followed him. In early October, Turner moved to a more audacious new hiding place, a cave-like depression beneath a fallen tree on Peter Edwards's land, less than a mile from where the rebellion began. He settled in, knowing his luck couldn't last forever. On the morning of October 30th, 1831, Farmer Benjamin Phipps, now habitually carrying a shotgun, noticed an unnatural pattern in the arrangement of leaves and fence rails near his property line. His heart pounding, Phipps approached the concealed hollow beneath the fallen tree. He raised his shotgun and called out, "Come out." After 10 weeks of hiding, the long silence was broken by movement. On the morning of October 30th, 1831, Farmer Benjamin Phipps found Nat Turner's hiding place. Turner emerged, extremely thin, exhausted, and covered in dirt, yet his eyes were still sharp. He did not resist capture and allegedly asked Phipps only one question: "How many of my men are still alive?" Hearing the truth, that most were dead or awaiting execution, Turner said nothing more. News of the capture spread instantly. Phipps guarded Turner in a locked shed overnight, holding off a crowd demanding an immediate lynching. The next day, Turner was transported to Jerusalem under heavy guard and placed in the county jail. Attorney Thomas Ruffin Gray quickly gained access to Turner, seeing an opportunity to publish his story and make a reputation. Over several days, Gray sat with Turner, documenting what became the infamous Confessions of Nat Turner. Turner was calm, articulate, and completely unrepentant. He described his divine visions, the signs, and his conviction that God chose him to lead his people out of bondage. When asked if he regretted the massive retaliation that followed, Turner was chillingly certain. He had done what the Spirit commanded, the deaths were necessary, and he would do it again. Gray framed Turner as a religious fanatic, but readers were left with the uncomfortable truth that Turner was a rational man who believed death was preferable to slavery, and that any violence against slavery was justified. Turner's trial on November 5, 1831, was a farce. Though provided an attorney, his confession and the overwhelming evidence predetermined the outcome. After the prosecution presented its case, Turner's lawyer, James Strange French, could offer no real defense, simply relying on the mercy of the court. There was none. The judges deliberated for less than an hour, returning the inevitable verdict: guilty, with a sentence of death by hanging to be carried out on November 11th. In the 6 days before his execution, Turner refused all attempts by ministers to make him renounce his visions, maintaining until the end that he had acted according to divine will. On November 11th, 1831, at approximately noon, Nat Turner was led to the gallows in Jerusalem. He walked without assistance. When asked for final words, Turner reportedly said only, "Was not Christ crucified?" He died quickly when the trapdoor opened. His body was left hanging for an hour as a warning, but what happened next was a deliberate act of horror. According to contemporary accounts, Turner's body was cut down and dissected, ostensibly for medical study. The horror did not end with Nat Turner's execution. His body was brutally desecrated. It was flayed, the skin preserved, and his skull reportedly passed among white families as a souvenir. This calculated act was meant to reduce him from a man to an object, but it had the opposite effect, cementing him as an eternal symbol of black resistance. The South's reaction to the rebellion revealed its deepest fears and resulted in a system-wide crackdown. Within weeks, Southern states enacted new laws, turning the slaveholding system into a totalitarian police state. This eliminated the spiritual and cultural solace these communities offered. Laws also restricted movement severely. Passes now required exact destinations and times, transforming the already sporadic slave patrols into constant, brutal presences on Virginia roads, often using any excuse to inflict violence. Insidiously, the new laws offered incentives for enslaved people to inform on each other, poisoning the trust vital for any organized resistance. These restrictions extended to free black people with ferocious speed. Through official harassment and terror, several counties forced their free black populations out. Free black people lost their rights to testify against whites or serve on juries, and their freedom became precarious. Hundreds migrated north or to Liberia. The effect across the South was to make slavery more complete, collapsing the narrow, precarious space enslaved people had previously maintained for their own institutions. The psychological impact on white Southerners was profound and lasting. The rebellion shattered the paternalistic mythology of slavery, the assumption that enslaved people held affection for their owners and would never harm them. If a good master like Joseph Travis could be murdered without hesitation, then no one was safe. This paranoia manifested in daily life. White women refused to be alone with servants, and families began sleeping with loaded pistols. Their children taught to be wary of the enslaved people who raised them. The entire social order was now rooted in an absolute, persistent terror. The forced intimacy of slavery, where enslaved people worked in the most private spaces of white homes, became a source of constant, gnawing anxiety after the rebellion. This fear rapidly accelerated the domestic slave trade. Virginia and the Upper South, with their diminishing agricultural returns, became major exporters of enslaved people to the expanding cotton plantations of the Deep South. This served multiple purposes. It was profitable. It reduced the black population concentration in areas like Tidewater, where they outnumbered whites. And most crucially, it broke up potential networks of resistance. The terror of being sold south became a tool of control more powerful than the whip, as it destroyed everything: family, community, and any small familiarity built over a lifetime. The rebellion also killed the gradual emancipation movement in Virginia. In the months following Turner's execution, approximately 2,000 Virginians, including some slaveholders, petitioned the legislature to dismantle slavery. The Virginia General Assembly debate in January 1832 was the most honest public discussion of slavery the state would likely ever have. For weeks, legislators debated its morality and economic viability. Thomas Jefferson Randolph introduced a bill for gradual emancipation and colonization, hoping to transition Virginia to free labor. However, opponents, fueled by the specter of Nat Turner and the fear of black revenge, argued that abolition was too expensive and that formerly enslaved people would become a dangerous underclass. The bill failed by a narrow margin of 15 votes, 73 against, 58 in favor. With this defeat, the last realistic chance for Virginia to voluntarily end slavery died. The door cracked open only to slam shut, paving the way for confrontation. The rebellion is considered by some historians to have made the Civil War inevitable. Turner destroyed the comfortable paternalistic myth that many white Southerners held, that their enslaved people were content. Forced to choose between ending the system and doubling down, they chose repression. This choice led to a dramatic shift in cultural response. Slavery changed from a necessary evil to a positive good. Southern ministers and politicians created an elaborate, aggressive pro-slavery ideology that claimed divine endorsement and biological inferiority of black people, hardening sectional divisions and accelerating the support for abolitionists in the North. In Southampton County, the memory of Nat's War became a permanent scar. Black residents used it as a historical marker for their own history, passing down a complex narrative of Turner as both hero and warning in whispers. White residents tried to control the narrative, emphasizing the white victims while ignoring the mass retaliatory violence. The psychological trauma passed through generations of white families, who remained wary and scarred by the sudden, terrifying understanding of betrayal. The fate of Nat Turner's body was a final, brutal act of vengeance. It was flayed, dissected, and his skull reportedly passed among white families as a souvenir. This desecration was meant to erase him, but ultimately cemented him as an unforgettable symbol of resistance. The fate of his wife, Cherry Turner, and their children remains tragically unknown. Under torture, she may have revealed some information, but they disappear from the historical record, a kind of violence that highlights the systematic erasure of black women's experiences. The rebellion's influence was seismic. In the North, Abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison seized on it as proof that slavery was inherently violent and could only be maintained through terror. For enslaved people across the South, Turner became a complex figure. Some saw him as a hero who struck a blow against an evil system, their reverence preserved in coded songs. Others viewed him as reckless, his actions having brought down severe repression on the entire black community. Turner had proven that rebellion was possible, but also how swiftly and brutally it would be crushed. The publication of Thomas Gray's Confessions ensured Turner's story would live on, though Gray's framing as a religious fanatic allowed white Southerners to dismiss him as a madman. Northern readers, however, often saw not madness but desperation, not fanaticism but faith. Figures like Frederick Douglass refused to condemn Turner's violence, arguing that it palled in comparison to the systematic violence of slavery itself, and affirming the right of the enslaved to resist by any means. Modern historians continue to grapple with Turner's legacy. Was he a fanatic or a freedom fighter? Turner himself never wavered, believing until his death that his actions were divinely commanded and justified, and that freedom was worth any price. The factual record remains. In August 1831, approximately 70 black people killed at least 55 white people. The overwhelming suppression led to the deaths of somewhere between 100 and 200 black people, most of them innocent, and hardened the path to the Civil War. Nat Turner had forced the South to confront a simple truth. Enslaved people desperately wanted their freedom, and if they couldn't gain it peacefully, they would fight for it violently. Today, Virginia offers small acknowledgments of the rebellion's sites, but the deeper, complex questions remain unresolved. How do we honor people who fought oppression while acknowledging that their methods involved killing non-combatants? Nat Turner's rebellion offers no easy answers. Only the raw, undeniable fact of a moment when people treated as property acted on the belief that they were human beings, shaking an entire region to its core. The blood spilled in Southampton County is part of the foundation on which modern America was built, and we can only try to understand it. The blood spilled in Southampton County in August 1831, both that of the white families killed in the rebellion and that of the black people killed in its aftermath, is part of the foundation on which modern America was built. We can't wash it away. We can only try to understand it. This story shows us that the history we're taught is often sanitized, simplified, made comfortable for modern audiences. The truth about slavery, about rebellion, about the violence that built America is far more complex and disturbing. What do you think of this story? Do you believe we're taught the full truth about events like Nat Turner's rebellion? Do you think violent resistance to slavery was justified? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a story that powerful people tried to erase, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell and share this video with someone who wants to understand American history beyond what they taught us in school. There are dozens more stories like this one buried, obscured, or deliberately forgotten. Let's bring them into the light together.